The lock clicked open with a sound like a gunshot in the dead silence of the hallway. Agnes held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The polished brass key stolen just an hour ago felt cold and heavy in her sweating palm. Every shadow in Lord Silas's opulent mansion seemed to writhe and watch her. She waited, ears straining for the shout of a guard, the pounding of boots for him to find her. Silence. It was now or never. She pushed the heavy oak door open just enough to slip through, her small frame trembling. The grand hallway stretched before her, a gauntlet of marble and moonlight. Her destination, the service entrance near the kitchens, the only way out that wasn't guarded by Silas's loyalists. She gathered the thin, worn fabric of her dress and ran, her bare feet making no sound on the cold floor. She was almost to the corner when voices, low and conspiratorial, froze her in her tracks. She recognized the oily, smooth tone of her guardian, Lord Silas. Panic seized her, a cold fist closing around her throat. She threw herself into a dark alcove, behind a towering statue of some forgotten wolf god, pressing her body flat against the wall. Not just an Omega Asher, Silas was saying to his companion, their figures cast in long shadows by the flickering torchlight. She's a key. A weapon. Her empathy is a weakness I have beaten into a strength. She can sense a lie, feel a man's intentions before he acts. Imagine that in a diplomatic setting. Imagine that on a battlefield, sensing the enemy's fear. Agnes squeezed her eyes shut, the words landing like physical blows. A weapon. That's all she was to him. A tool to be used. And you're certain the king will be interested? Asher replied, his voice skeptical. King Theron is a pragmatist, Silas sneered. He's been isolated for years. He'll see the strategic advantage immediately. I offer him the ultimate lie detector, the ultimate emotional spy, and in return he grants me a seat on his high council. A fair trade for one broken Omega. Broken. The word echoed in her soul. He had spent years ensuring it was true. The slaps for disobedience, the days locked in the dark, the constant grinding humiliation. All of it was designed to shatter her spirit and make her pliable. But this was the final betrayal. Selling her. Trading her like a piece of livestock to secure his own power. The fear that had been her constant companion was suddenly, violently, eclipsed by a wave of pure, incandescent rage. It was this new, unfamiliar emotion that made her slip. Her foot scuffed against the stone floor. The voices stopped. What was that? Asher hissed. Agnes's blood ran cold. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, but it was too late. Heavy footsteps approached her hiding spot. Come out, little mouse, Silas's voice purred, dripping with false sweetness that made her skin crawl. You know there's nowhere to run. Run. The word was a trigger. A primal instinct took over. She couldn't go back. She would rather die. As Silas's hand reached into the alcove, she exploded from her hiding place. She didn't look back, didn't think. She just ran. She heard his roar of fury behind her, the sound of his boots giving chase. Stop her, he bellowed. She rounded the corner, her lungs burning. The service entrance was just ahead, a plain, unassuming door that promised freedom. But two guards were already moving to block it, their faces hard. Trapped. Desperation clawed at her. To her left was another hallway, wider and more grandly decorated. The guest wing. And from that direction she could feel it, a pulsing, overwhelming wave of alpha power. It was a suffocating blanket of aggression, pride, and ambition, so thick in the air she could barely breathe. A council. Silas had said the king was holding a diplomatic council. It was a den of wolves. But behind her was the devil she knew. Without a second thought, Agnes veered left, throwing herself toward the source of the power. The doors to the Grand Council chamber were immense, carved from dark wood and inlaid with silver, but one was slightly ajar. A guard posted there looked at her in surprise as she streaked past him, a blur of fear and desperation. She burst into the chamber and the wall of sound and power hit her like a physical blow. Dozens of the most powerful alphas in the kingdom were shouting, arguing, their combined auras a tempest of fury and pride. It was agony. It was hell. Her senses were being shredded, her mind screaming under the assault. She saw Silas burst into the chamber behind her, his face a mask of apoplectic rage. You foolish girl, he snarled, starting toward her. Agnes was drowning. The lights were too bright, the voices too loud, the emotions too violent. Her vision tunneled. She had to get away, she had to find a quiet spot, a still point in the storm. And then she saw him. At the far end of the room, on a throne of obsidian and bone, sat King Theron. He was immense, even seated, his presence a dark, silent vortex in the chaotic room. He wasn't shouting. He was observing, his chiseled face an unreadable mask of cold disdain. And around him there was nothing. A strange, null void in the emotional chaos. It was the only calm in the storm. It was her only hope. With a final, desperate sob, Agnes ran. She weaved between stunned council members, ignoring their shouts of outrage, her focus solely on the throne. As Silas's hand nearly grasped her arm, she threw herself behind the massive throne, pressing her small body into the small space between the cold stone and the heavy velvet drapery, her hands flying to her mouth to stifle her terrified whimpers. Silence descended upon the room. All eyes turned to the throne. King Theron had gone perfectly still. His knuckles, where they rested on the arms of his throne, were white. Agnes squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for him to thrust her away, to call the guards, to throw her back to Silas. But then a low, guttural sound rumbled through the throne, a vibration she felt in her bones. It was a growl. Deep, possessive and protective. The king slowly turned his head, his dark eyes, now glowing with the faint silver of his wolf, looking down to where she was hidden. When he spoke, his voice was not the cold, diplomatic tool of a moment before. It was the raw, primal command of an alpha. "You're safe now, little one." The world stopped. No one had ever spoken those words to her. Ever. A sob escaped her, a tiny, broken sound. Silas stepped forward, his face pale but his voice slick with false contrition. "My most profound apologies, Your Majesty. My ward is unwell. She suffers from fits. I will remove her at once and punish her for this interruption." He strode forward, his intent a sharp, cruel spike in the air. He reached for her. "No." The plea was torn from her lips. As his fingers brushed her arm, something inside her snapped. The fear, the pain, the years of torment, and the fragile newborn hope that Theron's words had sparked. It all collided and erupted. A silent, invisible wave of pure psychic energy exploded from her. It wasn't a sound but a force. The stained glass windows behind the throne shattered. The heavy wooden table in the center of the room cracked in two. And like a scythe cutting through wheat, half of the High Council, including Lord Silas, was thrown backward, collapsing to the floor in an unconscious heap. The remaining alphas stared, their faces a mixture of terror and awe. Agnes's eyes rolled back in her head and she fainted, slumping against the base of the throne. King Theron looked from the devastation to the small, unconscious girl at his feet. His heart, a frozen stone in his chest for decades, gave a single hard thump. She wasn't just a scared Omega. He was dangerous. He was powerful. And as he looked at the faces of the surviving council members, he saw the dawning realization in their eyes. They all knew it too. The hunt for her had just begun. The world returned to Agnes in a dizzying wave of sensation. Not sound or sight first, but feeling. A deep, resonant calm, steady as a heartbeat, and beneath it a low thrum of annoyance. It was a foreign anchor in the storm of her own terror. She was lying on something impossibly soft, the scent of sandalwood and cold night air filling her senses. Her eyes flew open. She was in a cavernous bedroom, all dark stone and rich, deep blue fabrics. A fire crackled in a massive hearth, but it did little to chase the inherent chill from the air. This was not Lord Silas's gilded prison. This was something else. Something more formidable. Memory returned in a sickening rush. The escape. The council. Thing. His voice. "You're safe now, little one." Then Silas's hand on her arm, the explosive surge of something inside her, and then nothing. She had done something. Something terrible. A whimper escaped her lips as she scrambled back against the headboard of the massive bed, pulling the heavy fur blankets up to her chin. She had attacked the High Council. She had assaulted the king. She was going to be executed. This room, this fleeting sense of calm, was just a prelude to the dungeon, to the axe. The door to the chamber opened with a soft click. King Theron stood there, having changed from his formal council robes into a simple dark tunic and trousers that did nothing to diminish his imposing presence. He filled the doorway, his silver eyes scanning the room and instantly landing on her. He didn't enter fully, a silent acknowledgement of her fear. Agnes flinched, waiting for the condemnation, the roar of fury. It didn't come. He simply watched her, his gaze intense and unreadable. She could feel the echo of his emotions again, that same blend of calm and sharp intellectual irritation. It wasn't directed at her, she realized. It was about the situation. "You are in my private wing," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the stone floor. "No one enters here without my express permission. That includes Lord Silas." Her guardian's name was a trigger. A fresh wave of panic, cold and sharp, washed through her. She felt it pour out of her, a tangible thing, and saw the minute reaction in the king. His jaw tightened slightly, and the calm she felt from him intensified, as if he were consciously projecting it, a shield against her storm. What did I do?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse and screaming. "You displayed a level of power that hasn't been seen in this kingdom for a century," he stated, his tone factual, devoid of the awe or fear she'd heard in the council chamber. "You rendered 12 high-ranking alphas, including 2 war generals, unconscious with a single uncontrolled emotional surge. Terror, cold and absolute, seized her. She had known it was bad. She hadn't known it was cataclysmic. She was a dead woman. They would tear her apart. "I'm sorry," she choked out, tears starting to stream down her face. "I didn't mean to. I never mean to. It just happens." "I am aware," Theron said, and he finally took a step into the room, though he kept a careful distance, leaning against the heavy wooden post of the bed frame. "Your abilities. This empathy. Explain it." It wasn't a request. It was a command from her king. But the part of her that had been broken by Silas recoiled. Sharing her weakness was how he controlled her. She shook her head, pressing herself harder against the headboard, her silence a plea in itself. Theron's annoyance spiked, and she felt it like a pinprick. He let out a short, frustrated breath. "You are a strategic nightmare, girl. Your abuser was planning to sell you to me as a weapon. Half my council now sees you as the ultimate prize to be captured and controlled. The other half sees you as a monster to be put down. Your power is a threat to the stability of my entire kingdom." Each word was a hammer blow, confirming her worst fears. He was a problem. A thing to be managed or eliminated. "Then just let me go," she begged, fresh tears falling. "I'll disappear. I'll go far away where I can't hurt anyone." No. The single word was absolute, final. It shattered her last, fleeting hope. "You are a subject of this crown," he continued, his voice hardening. "And you are now a person of supreme interest to the crown. Letting you disappear is not an option. The second you left this fortress, you would be snatched up by Silas or one of his rivals. Your power would be turned against this kingdom, against the people I am sworn to protect. I will not allow that." He pushed off the bedpost and walked to the window, looking out over the moonlit mountains. His broad back was to her, but she could still feel the relentless churn of his thoughts. The calm was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. "So what will you do with me?" Agnes asked, her voice small and broken. "Lock me in a dungeon?" Theron turned, and his silver eyes pinned her in place. For the first time she saw something else in them, something beyond the king and the strategist. It was the faint, wild gleam of his wolf. "No," he said, and the word was a vow. "From this moment forward, you are under my personal protection. You are my charge. My responsibility." He took a step closer and another until he was standing beside the bed. He didn't touch her, but his presence was an overwhelming force. "But understand this, Agnes. The world now knows what you are. They will come for you. They will try to manipulate you, to break you, to claim you. Your survival and the safety of everyone in this castle depends on you learning to control what is inside you." He leaned down slightly, his gaze boring into hers. "You are not a weapon. You are a storm. And I will teach you to be the master of the wind and the rain." Before she could process his words, the chamber door burst open. Commander Reese, the king's second, stood there, his face grim. "Your Majesty, Lord Silas is at the gates. He is demanding the return of his property. He has brought 50 of his best men." All the color drained from Agnes's face. Silas was here. He had come for her. The calm she'd felt from Theron vanished, replaced in an instant by a wave of pure, undiluted fury so potent it stole her breath. It was ancient and predatory, and it made the air in the room crackle. Theron's eyes glowed with a feral light. The strategist was gone. Only the alpha remained. Good, Theron snarled, the sound barely human. I was hoping for an excuse. He turned and strode from the room, his power rolling off him in waves. As he passed Rhys, his command echoed back into the chamber, a promise of violence that was both terrifying and, to Agnes's utter shock, deeply reassuring. Lock down the fortress. No one enters or leaves. And tell Lord Silas, Theron's voice dropped to a deadly whisper, that if he values his life he will get the hell away from my gate. The door slammed shut, leaving Agnes alone, trembling, the king's fury still echoing in her soul. He was going to fight for her. No one had ever fought for her. The realization was as terrifying as the power she held within. The slam of the chamber door was a final, terrifying period at the end of the king's decree. Agnes was alone again, but this silence was different. It was charged, vibrating with the echo of Theron's unleashed fury. She could still feel it, a distant rolling thunder in her soul, a stark contrast to the icy fear Silas's name invoked. She scrambled from the bed, her legs weak, and stumbled to the window. The courtyard below was a scene of organized chaos. Torches flared, illuminating the grim faces of the king's guard as they took up positions on the high walls. The main gate, a monstrous structure of iron and oak, was being reinforced with heavy crossbeams. And beyond it she saw them. The banners of House Silas, a silver hawk on a black field fluttering in the torchlight. 50 armed men, a small army, stood in a menacing line. At their front, mounted on a dark horse, was Silas himself. Even from this distance she could feel his rage, a sharp, poisonous spike that made her stomach clench. Her empathy, usually a curse, was now her only tether to the unfolding drama. She closed her eyes, focusing. She felt Theron long before she saw him. A dark, gathering storm of power moving through the fortress. A palpable wave of dominance that made the very stones hum. He emerged onto the high battlement directly above the gate, not in armor, but in the same dark clothes he'd worn in her room. The message was clear. He did not need armor to deal with this threat. Lord Silas, Theron's voice carried over the courtyard, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. It was not a shout, yet it silenced everything. You bring armed men to my gate. Explain this treason. Silas dismounted, his movements stiff with outrage. Treason, your majesty? I come to retrieve what is rightfully mine. That girl is my ward. She is unstable, dangerous, as you have witnessed. Her place is under my control, where she can do no more harm. Agnes's hands tightened on the windowsill. Control. That was all he ever wanted. Your control, Theron's voice dropped, becoming dangerously soft, seems to be the very thing that makes her dangerous. You have 5 seconds to order your men to stand down and leave my territory. Silas's aura flared with arrogant defiance. Or what, your majesty? Will you go to war over one broken Omega? The council will not stand for it. A low, guttural growl rumbled from Theron, a sound that was felt by every wolf in the vicinity. Agnes felt it in her bones, a primal call that both terrified and thrilled her. The council, Theron boomed, his voice now laced with the full force of his wolf, witnessed you attempt to lay hands on a person under the king's protection after I explicitly declared her safe. By our oldest laws, your actions were a direct challenge to my authority. So no, Silas. This is not about the council. This is between you and me. Theron moved with a predator's grace, leaping from the battlement to land on the top of the gate itself, a 20-foot drop that he made look effortless. He stood silhouetted against the moon, a king of night and shadow. I am not declaring war on your house, Silas, Theron announced, his voice cutting through the night. That would be a political matter. This is personal. You threatened what is mine. What is mine? The words echoed in Agnes's soul, sparking a fragile, hopeful warmth. I challenge you, Silas. Theron's declaration was a death sentence. Alpha to alpha. Right here, right now. No weapons. Just tooth and claw. The winner decides the girl's fate. A stunned silence fell over the courtyard. A royal challenge was a rare, sacred thing. There was no refusing it. Agnes watched, her heart in her throat, as Silas's face paled. He was a cunning politician, not a frontline warrior. But to refuse was to be branded a coward, his power and influence shattered forever. He was trapped. With a snarl of pure hatred, Silas began to strip off his tunic. So be it. Theron didn't wait. As Silas bared his arms, the king threw his head back and a roar tore from his chest, a sound of raw, untamed power. The shift did not come in a slow, painful transformation she had heard of in stories. It was a violent, instantaneous explosion of energy. One moment he was a man, the next, a massive jet-black wolf larger than any she had ever imagined stood on the gate. His eyes burned with the same silver fire fixed on his prey. The fight was not a battle. It was an execution. Silas barely completed his own more labored shift into a smaller, gray-flecked wolf before Theron was upon him. The black wolf moved like liquid darkness, a blur of power and fury. There was no posturing, no circling. It was pure, efficient dominance. Theron's jaws clamped down on the scruff of Silas's neck, and with a powerful shake of his massive head, he threw the gray wolf against the stone wall of the gatehouse. The crack of bone was audible even from Agnes's window. Silas whimpered, trying to scramble away, but Theron was relentless. He pounced again, his paw tipped with claws like daggers, slashing across Silas's flank, drawing a line of crimson. This was not just about winning. This was about delivering a message. A punishment. Agnes should have looked away. She should have been sickened. But as she watched the tyrant who had tortured her for years be broken and humiliated, all she felt was a profound, shocking sense of justice. A weight she had carried for a lifetime began to crack. With a final, powerful bite to the shoulder that was not meant to kill, but to maim, Theron held the defeated, whimpering gray wolf pinned to the ground. He lifted his massive head, his silver eyes sweeping over Silas's terrified men. He shifted back to his human form in another blinding flash, standing over his rival, chest heaving, not a scratch on him. His voice, when he spoke, was a cold, absolute command that brooked no argument. "Let it be known," King Theron declared, "that Agnes is under my protection. To touch her is to challenge me. To challenge me is to die. Now take your broken master and get out of my sight. If any of you ever set foot in my territory again, you will not leave it breathing." The gates did not open. Silas's men had to scramble to lift their injured lord, now shifted back to his human form, bleeding and broken, and flee into the darkness on foot, leaving their horses and their pride behind. Theron stood watching them go, a solitary, powerful figure. Then he turned his gaze upward, his silver eyes finding hers in the window. And in that moment Agnes felt it. A single, clear emotion that cut through the aftermath of his rage. It wasn't pride in his victory. It wasn't the cold satisfaction of justice. It was concern. For her. The warmth in her chest bloomed into a fire, and for the first time Agnes did not feel like a burden. She felt cherished. The silence after the battle was louder than the clash of wolves. Agnes remained at the window, her knuckles white where she gripped the stone sill. The scent of blood and victory hung in the air, a primal perfume that stirred something deep within her. She watched Theron in the courtyard below, a king surveying his domain, his power a quiet, thrumming hum against her senses. He had fought for her. Killed for her. The reality of it was a seismic shift in her world. When his gaze lifted and met hers, the connection was a physical jolt. The concern she felt from him was a steady, warm hand on her frantic soul. He gave a single curt nod before turning to speak with Commander Reese. The moment broke, but the echo of it remained, a fragile thread of trust now spun between them. She didn't retreat when the door to her chamber opened a short while later. Theron entered, the scent of night and cold air clinging to him. There was no blood on him, but the aura of the Alpha, the victor, was a tangible force that filled the room. He studied her, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "He will not trouble you again," Theron stated, his voice a low rumble. It was not a question nor a boast. It was a simple, unshakable fact. Agnes found her voice, small but steady. "Thank you." He acknowledged her gratitude with a slight tilt of his head. "Do not thank me. I did what was necessary." He moved further into the room, his presence making the spacious chamber feel intimate. "What you felt during the fight, the fear, the rage, the triumph. Could you distinguish it all?" The question surprised her. She nodded slowly. "Yes. From you it was like a storm. From him, it was poison." "Good." A flicker of approval crossed his face and she felt it, a small warm spark. "That is your first lesson. Awareness. Most wolves are slaves to their emotions. You can hear the symphony. The trick is not to be swept away by the music. He stopped a few feet from her. We begin your training now. Now, she squeaked, the steadiness she'd found evaporating. The council is in an uproar. Silas's allies are already scheming. Your uncontrolled power is a vulnerability I cannot afford and you cannot survive. His tone was relentless. Your empathy is a two-way street, Agnes. You are not just a receiver. You are a broadcaster. What you felt in the council chamber was a psychic blast, a surge of your own terror amplified and projected outward. The memory of the shattered windows, the fallen alphas, made her shudder. I don't know how to control it. It just happens. It happens when you are overwhelmed. When you have no anchor. He took a step closer. So we will find you an anchor. He held out his hand not to touch her but as a focus. I want you to try to lower your shields. She blinked. I don't have any shields. You do. They are what keep you from going mad in a crowd. They are flimsy, born of instinct, but they are there. I want you to consciously let them down. Let the emotions in. Panic fluttered in her chest. I can't. It's too much. It will not be, he said, his voice unwavering. Because you will use me. My emotional state is disciplined. Controlled. It will be the rock you cling to in the current. Let the world in, Agnes, and focus only on the steadiness you feel from me. Terrified, she closed her eyes. She imagined the fragile, invisible walls she'd built around her mind her whole life. With a deep, shaky breath, she mentally pushed them down. The onslaught was immediate. She gasped as the emotions of the entire fortress crashed into her. The lingering battle lust from the guards on the wall, the anxiety from the servants, the sharp, calculating thoughts of Commander Reese somewhere below. It was a roaring cacophony, a tidal wave threatening to pull her under and drown her. But through the chaos, one presence stood firm. Theron. His emotional signature was not flat, but it was ordered. A foundation of calm authority, a layer of focused intent, and beneath it all, a deep, resonating power that was as solid as the mountain the fortress was built upon. Focus on my heartbeat. The thought wasn't her own. It was a quiet command felt more than heard that cut through the noise. She latched onto it, onto the steady, rhythmic thrum of his life force. She breathed in time with it, in and out, letting the other emotions flow around her like water around a stone. The panic receded. The roar became a murmur. Good. Theron's voice was soft, a guide in the storm. Now build the wall again. But this time weave my calm into it. Make me your foundation. She concentrated, pulling the walls back up. But instead of the flimsy, fear-based barriers of before, she imagined them forged from his unyielding strength, lined with his cool control. When she was done, the world was quiet again. The emotions were still there, but they were distant, muted. She was safe inside a fortress within her own mind. She opened her eyes, stunned. She felt clear. For the first time in her life, her head wasn't filled with the static of other people's feelings. Theron was watching her, and for the first time she saw something like genuine respect in his gaze. You are a quick study. A sudden, reckless courage filled her. You said I was a broadcaster. Can I send an emotion? His eyebrow lifted in surprise. Try. She looked at him, at this powerful, isolated king who had become her unlikely protector. She focused on the new warm feeling growing in her chest, a mixture of gratitude, trust, and the first fragile tendrils of something deeper. She gathered it and imagined sending it down the thread that now connected them, a single soft pulse of pure, unfiltered warmth. Theron's breath hitched. His eyes widened a fraction. The controlled mask he always wore slipped, just for an instant, and she saw raw, unguarded shock. He had felt it. He took a sharp step back, the moment shattering. The king was back, his expression once again unreadable. But his emotional shield for a brief second had faltered, and she had felt the echo of her own warmth reflected back at her, tenfold. Enough for today, he said, his voice slightly rough. He turned and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. He didn't look back. You are more powerful than you know. Get some rest. The door closed, leaving Agnes alone with the lingering sensation of his shock and the thrilling, terrifying knowledge that she had just touched the heart of the untouchable king. The newfound quiet in her mind was a fragile miracle. For 3 days Agnes practiced, building and rebuilding her mental walls with Theron's calm as her foundation. It was exhausting, like lifting a weight she had never known was there, but the peace it brought was intoxicating. She slept through the night for the first time in years. But the outside world would not be kept at bay forever. On the fourth day, a formal summons arrived, delivered by a stone-faced servant. The High Council requested her presence. The scroll, heavy with official wax seals, felt like a death warrant in her hands. The fragile walls in her mind trembled. Theron entered her chamber without ceremony, his expression a thundercloud. He had felt her spike of fear from across the fortress. "You are not going." "They've summoned me," she whispered, holding out the scroll. "If I don't, it makes you look weak. It makes me look guilty." "I do not care how it makes me look," he growled, his own aura flaring with protective fury. "They are vipers. They will try to break you, to provoke you into another display. They want to see if Silas was right, if you are a weapon they can control." "Then I won't break," Agnes said, the words surprising even her. She met his gaze, drawing strength from the steady, angry rhythm of his heart that she could now feel without even trying. "He said I needed to learn control. What better test than a den of vipers?" A grudging respect flickered in his silver eyes. He closed the distance between them, his presence a shield. "Then you do not go alone. You will be at my side. Every moment. You will look at no one but me. You will listen to my voice in your mind, not their lies in your ears. Do you understand?" She nodded, her throat tight. "Good." He offered her his arm, not as a king to a subject but as a partner. Let them see what they are dealing with. The walk to the council chamber was a march to the gallows. Every echo of their footsteps in the cold stone hallways felt like a countdown. But the solid warmth of Theron's arm beneath her hand was her anchor. She focused on it, building her walls, layer by layer, weaving his strength into every brick. When the doors opened, the wall of aggressive alpha power hit her like a physical blow. It was worse than before. Now it was laced with curiosity, greed, and a sharp, calculating hunger. She felt their eyes on her, stripping her bare, assessing her value and her threat. But her walls held. Theron led her to the head of the cracked table, a stark reminder of her power, and did not sit her in a subordinate's chair. He had a second seat placed directly beside his throne. A clear, unequivocal message. The session began. It was a masterclass in political manipulation. Lord Valerius, a sleek, silver-haired wolf who had been Silas's chief rival, began with honeyed words. "My dear, the entire kingdom is concerned for your well-being. The trauma you have endured, to be housed so closely with His Majesty, without the calming presence of an Omega matron, it is most irregular. We have several esteemed families who would be honored to offer you sanctuary, to guide you." Agnes felt the insidious pull of his false concern, a sticky web meant to entrap. She kept her eyes on Theron as instructed. "He wants to steal what is mine." Theron's voice was a cool, clear thought in her mind. "His concern is greed." The truth of it solidified her resolve. Then General Corbin, a hulking warrior with a face like granite, slammed a fist on the table. "Enough coddling. The girl is a weapon. She proved that when she knocked us all on our backsides. This kingdom faces threats from the eastern pacts. She should be trained for battle, her powers harnessed for the crown's defense. His ambition was a battering ram, loud and brutish. It was easier to resist. He fears irrelevance." Theron's mental voice came again, laced with contempt. "He sees you as a new, bigger sword to wield." Agnes remained silent, her posture calm, her hands folded in her lap. She was a still pond in the center of a hurricane. It was Lady Cordelia, the only female on the council, who played the most dangerous card. Her voice was like poisoned silk. "Your Majesty, we all see the attachment forming. But surely you see the conflict? An unmated Alpha King housing a powerful, unmated Omega? The rumors alone are destabilizing. For the sake of the crown's integrity, perhaps a different, more neutral arrangement should be found." Her words were daggers aimed at the fragile trust between them. They implied something sordid, something political. Agnes felt a flare of heat in her chest, not fear but indignation. Theron's hand came to rest over hers on the arm of her chair. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure, steadying power. She attacks the bond because she has no other weapon. His thought was a caress, soothing the sting. She fears its strength. He stood then, his presence dominating the room. "Are you quite finished?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. You have offered your concern, your strategic advice, and your moral counsel. Now you will listen. Agnes is not a ward to be reassigned. She is not a weapon to be deployed. She is under my protection, and she is in the process of mastering a power that would have shattered any one of you. Your continued attempts to manipulate this situation are not just an insult to her, but an act of treason against your king. He looked at each of them in turn, his silver gaze forcing them to look away. The discussion about Agnes is closed. Permanently. The next person who brings it before this council will join Silas in exile. He turned to her, his voice softening only for her. Come. As they walked out, the silence in the chamber was absolute. They had won. They had faced the wolves and emerged unscathed. But back in the solitude of his private study, Theron's calm facade cracked. He paced before the fire, a caged predator. They will not stop, he bid out. Cordelia was right about one thing. The rumors are a weapon. They will try to use this connection between us to undermine us both. Agnes watched him, the warmth from his touch still lingering on her hand. The same warmth she had sent him during their lesson. She realized then that the council's greatest fear was not her power alone. It was the combination of her power and his. It was their bond. And as she looked at the agitated, powerful king, she understood with sudden, terrifying clarity that the bond they feared was already there, weaving itself tighter with every shared glance, every whispered thought, every protective act. It was no longer just about survival. A new, dangerous game had begun, and they were both playing for keeps. The victory in the council chamber was short-lived. A new, more insidious threat emerged. The court itself. Whispers slithered through the gilded hallways like venomous snakes. The king is bewitched. The Omega has him under a spell. She's a threat to the crown's stability. The rumors were a poison that Agnes's empathy couldn't block out. She felt the collective suspicion and jealousy of the entire court as a constant, low-grade headache. Theron's solution was a public appearance. The Royal Hunt, a traditional event where the court observed the king and his elite guards showcase their prowess, was the stage. They need to see you as strong, not a victim. As controlled, not a danger, he told her, his tone leaving no room for argument. They need to see you at my side, unbroken. And so, Agnes found herself draped in a gown of deep emerald velvet, standing beside Theron on a raised dais at the edge of the ancient hunting woods. The entire court was arrayed behind them in a sea of glittering silks and judgmental stares. She felt like a rare animal on display, her every flinch, every nervous glance, being catalogued and criticized. She focused on Theron, on the solid, unwavering pillar of his presence. He was in his element, a king surveying his domain, his power a visible mantle on his broad shoulders. He pointed out the movements of the hunters below, his voice a low, steady murmur meant only for her. It was working. She was calm. Her walls were holding. Until the stag broke from the treeline. It was a magnificent creature, all-powerful muscle and sweeping antlers. It was also terrified. A wave of pure, animal panic slammed into Agnes's carefully constructed shields. It was so raw, so primal, that it bypassed her mental defenses and struck directly at her heart. The stag's fear mirrored her own so perfectly, the trapped feeling, the certainty of death, that for a terrifying second she was the stag. Her control shattered. A psychic wail, silent and invisible, tore from her. It wasn't the violent blast of the council chamber. This was a wave of debilitating sorrow and fear. On the field below, the hunting wolves, so focused on the chase, stumbled and whined, shaking their heads in confusion. Throughout the crowd, nobles gasped, clutching their chests or wiping sudden unexplained tears from their eyes. A wave of profound melancholy had washed over the entire gathering. Theron's hand shot out, his fingers closing firmly around her wrist. His touch was a lifeline. Agnes. Look at me. His voice was a command in her mind, sharp and clear. She wrenched her gaze from the fleeing stag and met his eyes. They were blazing with intensity but not anger. There was a fierce, protective understanding in them. He had felt what she felt. He knew. Breathe, he ordered, his voice low. Build the wall. No. With me. She gasped, pulling air into her lungs, using the feel of his skin against hers as her anchor. She rebuilt the mental fortress, stone by stone, weaving his unwavering strength into it until the overwhelming fear of the stag and the shock of the crowd became a distant murmur. The hunt was ruined. The court was in a hushed, bewildered uproar. But Theron did not acknowledge it. He kept his hold on her wrist, his thumb stroking a slow, soothing rhythm over her racing pulse. He turned to the stunned master of the hunt. The beast was worthy. Let it go. The hunt is concluded. His decree was absolute. He didn't wait for a response. Still holding her wrist, he turned and led her from the dais, away from the whispering, staring courtiers. He didn't rush. He walked with a king's dignity, his grip on her a public declaration that he was not ashamed, that he was not retreating. He was claiming her. He didn't stop until they were deep within the private royal gardens, the sounds of the court far behind them. Only then did he release her. She expected fury, frustration. Instead he turned to her, his expression grim but not unkind. "It was the fear," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "It was so much like my own. I'm sorry. I failed." "No," he said, his voice firm. "You did not fail. You were tested by a trigger I did not anticipate. And you recovered. You rebuilt your control in the middle of the storm. That is not failure, Agnes. That is a victory." He stepped closer, the scent of pine and cold air enveloping her. "The court saw two things today. They saw your power, yes. But they also saw my power to anchor you. They saw that your weakness is not a liability when you are with me. It is a strength we share." He cupped her face, his touch surprisingly gentle. "They thought to break us with their whispers and their stares. Instead they saw that the bond they fear is the very thing that makes you strong. Let them whisper. Let them plot. They now know that to come for you they must first go through me. And after today, they are far more frightened of me than they are of you." In the quiet of the garden, with his hand on her face and his unwavering belief surrounding her, Agnes felt the last of her shame melt away. He was right. She hadn't broken. She had bent, and he had been there to keep her from snapping. She was not a danger he needed to manage. She was a partner he chose to protect. And that realization was more powerful than any psychic blast. The quiet of the royal gardens was a sanctuary. For a week they existed in a fragile bubble. Agnes's control grew stronger, her mental walls becoming as natural as breathing. Theron was a constant presence, his stern demeanor softening in their private moments. He began to share fragments of his own past. The weight of the crown, the loneliness of leadership, the decades of emotional isolation that had made his heart a fortress as imposing as the stone one they lived in. It was during one of these quiet evenings by the fire in his study that the crack appeared. Agnes was practicing, focusing on sending him a simple, clear emotion, the peace she felt in his presence. He was working on state documents, but a faint smile touched his lips as her warmth reached him. It was a new, cherished ritual. "It's strange," she mused, staring into the flames. "For years I thought my empathy was a curse Silas could sense. But no. I wonder if it was the reason he took me in the first place. I have no memory of my parents. He told me they were vagrants who died of fever." Theron set down his quill, his full attention on her. "He never spoke of your lineage? Your family name?" She shook her head. "He said it didn't matter. That he was giving me a better life." The bitterness in her voice was a sharp, new edge. A thoughtful frown creased Theron's brow. "An empath of your strength. It is not a common trait. It is often a hereditary gift, passed through specific bloodlines." A cold dread, entirely separate from her empathy, began to uncoil in her stomach. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that Silas is a collector of power. He would not have taken in a random gifted child out of charity. He would have sought you out." Theron stood, his movements suddenly charged with a new urgency. He moved to a locked cabinet behind his desk, retrieving a heavy leather-bound tome, the royal lineage and records of noble houses. He opened it, the ancient pages crackling. "Describe the earliest memory you have of your life before his house." Agnes closed her eyes, reaching for the hazy, painful fragments. "Fire. I remember the smell of smoke. And a woman singing. A lullaby. There was a symbol on the wall, carved into the stone above a hearth. A bird, with a flower in its beak." Theron's fingers stilled on the page. His aura, usually so controlled, flashed with a shock so violent it felt like a thunderclap in the quiet room. He slowly turned the book around, pointing to a faded crest. There was a graceful bird, a sparrow holding a single blooming rose in its beak. The crest of House Rosalind, Theron said, his voice dangerously quiet. A line known for its healers and its empaths. They were a peaceful house, loyal to the crown. Agnes's blood ran cold. Were. Theron's jaw tightened. They were declared traitors. They were accused of plotting with a rival kingdom. Their estate was burned. The entire family was executed on the orders of. He stopped, his silver eyes meeting hers, filled with a horror that mirrored her own. On whose orders? Agnes whispered, the room tilting around her. On the sworn testimony and evidence provided by Lord Silas, Theron said, each word falling like a stone. He was rewarded with their lands and their title. And it seems, he kept one final trophy. The world shattered. The memories she had suppressed, the nightmares of fire and screaming, they weren't just nightmares. They were her history. Her family. Not vagrants. Not traitors. A noble house, slaughtered. And she was the sole survivor. The heir. Silas hadn't just abused her. He had destroyed her entire world and then taken her as a prize, molding her into a weapon forged from the ashes of her own family. A scream built in her throat, but no sound came out. It was a silent, internal shattering. Her empathy, usually a conduit for the emotions of others, turned inward, reflecting her own bottomless grief, her world-ending betrayal. The walls in her mind didn't just crack, they vaporized. The physical world reacted. The fire in the hearth roared, flaring up to the mantel. The glass in the windows trembled, vibrating in their frames. The very stones of the fortress seemed to groan. In the courtyard below, wolves howled in unison, a chorus of shared, inexplicable anguish. Theron was at her side in an instant, his hands on her shoulders. Agnes, look at me. But she was lost. She was 7 years old again, watching her home burn, hearing the screams of her family, feeling the hands of the man who had orchestrated it all pulling her away. He killed them, she rasped, her voice not her own. He killed them all. And he made me call him guardian. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, glowed with a faint silver light. You protected me from him. But who was going to protect me from you? Your crown sanctioned it. Your justice murdered my family. It was the most devastating psychic blast of all. Not of power but of truth. It wasn't aimed at him, but it struck him with the force of a physical blow. He felt her grief as his own, the searing pain of loss, the corrosive acid of betrayal that went so much deeper than either of them had ever imagined. He didn't try to soothe her. He didn't command her to control it. He simply pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as her silent, world-shattering sobs finally broke through. He held her as the last of her family died again in her memory. He held her as the foundation of the new life he'd built for her crumbled to dust. He had thought he was saving a broken Omega. He had just discovered he was sheltering the living, breathing consequence of his kingdom's greatest injustice. And as she wept against his chest, her tears soaking through his tunic, King Theron knew the battle had just changed. This was no longer about protecting a powerful girl from the world. It was about saving her from the devastating truth of a past that his own throne had helped to right. Agnes was a ghost in the fortress she had begun to call home. The ember of trust and warmth that had been carefully kindled between her and Theron had been extinguished, leaving only the cold, bitter ash of betrayal. She retreated to the farthest corner of her room, drawing her knees to her chest, a silent sentinel to her own grief. The empathic walls she had built were now a permanent, impenetrable fortress, and she was the solitary prisoner inside. Theron gave her space. He did not try to force his way in either physically or mentally. He could feel the void where her presence had been in his mind, a hollow, aching silence. He had spent a sleepless night in his study, the damning record of House Rosalind's fall open before him. The evidence, once seeming so conclusive, now read like a script written by Silas. The testimonies were from his allies. The proof was circumstantial. It had been a rush to judgment, a convenient eradication of a peaceful house that had stood in the way of Silas's ambition, an ambition the crown had blindly rewarded. He had failed her long before he ever met her. The following morning he stood outside her chamber not as a king but as a supplicant. "Agnes," he said, his voice low but clear through the door. "I am leaving the fortress. I do not ask for your forgiveness, for I have not earned it. I only ask that you do not leave. You are safe here even from me. Commander Reese will ensure it. There was no response from within. Only a wall of cold silence. He left within the hour. Not with a royal procession, but with a small elite unit of his most trusted guards. He rode for the burned-out husk of the Rosalind estate. Days passed. Agnes moved through her rooms like a phantom. The servants left trays of food that often went untouched. Commander Reese was a respectful, silent shadow, his loyalty to Theron a quiet assurance of her safety, but it did nothing to mend the chasm in her soul. She was adrift in a sea of grief, the memory of her family's faces, once blurred, now sharp and painful in her mind. It was on the 5th day that a disturbance in the courtyard below pulled her from her stupor. She moved to the window, her movements sluggish. King Theron had returned. He was covered in the dust of the road, his clothes smudged with soot. But it was what he carried that made her breath catch in her throat. In his arms he held a large mud-caked wooden chest, its surface charred by fire but still intact. Behind him his guards carefully unloaded other artifacts. A painting carefully wrapped in canvas, a set of tarnished silver candlesticks, a small handmade wooden toy wolf. He had gone to the ruins of her home. He had dug through the ashes of her past. A flicker of something, not hope, not yet, but a fragile curiosity, pricked at the edges of her numbness. She watched as he carried the chest not to the treasury, but directly toward her chambers. A few minutes later a soft knock came at her door. It opened before she could answer and Theron entered. He looked exhausted, his face grimed with sweat and ash, but his silver eyes burned with a fierce, determined light. He placed the heavy chest on the floor at the foot of her bed with a solid thud. "I cannot give you back your family," he said, his voice rough with fatigue and emotion. "I cannot undo the injustice my crown allowed. My words are worthless to you now. So I brought you what I could." He knelt, ignoring the grime on his knees, and opened the chest. Agnes's breath hitched. Inside, carefully packed, were the ghosts of her former life. A porcelain doll with faded red hair like her own. A woman's velvet cloak, smelling faintly of lavender and smoke. A bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. A locket that, when she tremblingly clicked it open, held a tiny portrait of a smiling woman who had her eyes, her mother. "We found a sealed cellar," Theron explained quietly, watching her face. "The most valuable things were down there. Silas's men missed it." He then gestured to the wrapped painting. His guards brought it in and leaned it against the wall. He pulled back the canvas. It was a family portrait. A kind-faced man with a strong jaw, a beautiful woman with a gentle smile, and a little girl with fiery red hair, sitting on her mother's lap, laughing. They were seated before a hearth, and carved into the stone mantel was the sparrow with the rose. Her family. Whole. Happy. A sob finally broke through the dam of her grief. It was a sound of pure, shattered agony. She fell to her knees before the portrait, her hands hovering over the painted faces as if she could touch them. Theron did not move to hold her. He simply remained kneeling, sharing the space of her grief, offering not comfort but evidence. Proof that her past, her love, her identity had been real. "The official record has been annulled," he stated, his voice gaining the steel of a king's decree. "House Rosalind is restored. His honor is cleansed. You are Lady Agnes of House Rosalind, its last surviving heir. All lands and titles stolen by Silas are returned to you." He paused, letting the weight of it settle. "And tomorrow I ride to the borderlands where Silas is hiding. I am not going as your king to punish a traitor. I am going as the man who failed you to deliver the justice you were denied. Not for my crown. For you." He stood then, leaving the treasures of her past scattered around her. He had given her back her name, her history, her truth. He had given her everything but empty words. As he reached the door, her voice, raw and broken, stopped him. "Theron." He turned. Tears streamed down her face, but the numbness in her eyes was gone, replaced by a storm of painful, healing emotion. The wall between them was still there, but a single fragile thread of connection had been spun once more. "Come back," she whispered. It was not forgiveness. It was a request. A plea. A look of profound, soul-deep relief passed over his weary features. He gave a single solemn nod. "For you," he vowed, "I would tear the world apart and walk back through the flames." Then he was gone, leaving her surrounded by the echoes of her past and the terrifying, fragile hope for a future she had to choose to build. Theron's departure was a silent vow that echoed through the stone corridors. Agnes felt the moment he passed beyond the reach of her empathy, his steady presence fading into a faint, determined pulse in the back of her mind. The fortress, once her gilded cage, now felt like a hollow shell. But she was no longer the broken girl who had hidden behind a throne. She was Lady Agnes of House Rosalind, and she had a purpose. She spent the days that followed not in mourning but in fortification. With Commander Reese as her reluctant aide, she pored over the recovered letters and ledgers from the chest. She wasn't just seeking memories, she was searching for evidence. Silas had not acted alone in destroying her family. He had allies, and they were likely the same voices on the council that now sought to control her. Her empathy, once a source of torment, became her sharpest tool. During a brief, tense meeting with the stewards now managing her restored estate, she felt the flicker of deceit from one of them, a man named Evander who had been placed by Lord Valerius. She didn't confront him. She simply had Reese quietly investigate, uncovering a scheme to divert funds. It was a small victory, but it proved her power could be a shield, not just a weapon. Meanwhile, the thread connecting her to Theron stretched taut. She felt his relentless focus, the cold burn of his fury, and beneath it, a new, unshakable resolve that was tied directly to her. He was not just hunting for justice, he was hunting for her. Each night she would send a single deliberate pulse down that bond. Not warmth, not love, but a simple, steady affirmation. I am here. I am waiting. It was on the 7th night that everything shattered. She was asleep, surrounded by the ghosts of her family, when a searing, white-hot agony tore through the mental thread connecting her to Theron. Her eyes flew open, a silent scream lodged in her throat. It wasn't her pain, it was his. A wave of debilitating physical anguish, followed by a surge of drugged confusion and grim triumph that was not his own. She saw flashes behind her eyes. A darkened forest, the glint of a blade coated with wolfsbane, Theron roaring as he fell, his leg buckling under him. And standing over him, flanked by a new, unknown pack of roughened mercenaries, was Silas. His face was a twisted mask of hatred and victory. But worse than the physical trap was the psychic one. Silas hadn't just ambushed the king. He had a new ally, a gaunt, hooded figure whose presence felt like a void, a sucking drain on emotion. A psychic leech. This creature was projecting a wave of despair and helplessness, a mental poison designed to paralyze Theron's wolf, to make him surrender. And it was working. Through their bond, Agnes felt the king's formidable will beginning to falter under the constant draining assault. He's dying, she whispered into the dark, cold terror gripping her heart. The old Agnes would have frozen. The old Agnes would have collapsed under the weight of his pain and the council's schemes. But the old Agnes was gone. She threw back the covers, her body thrumming with a new kind of energy. She dressed in simple, sturdy clothes and strode from her room, her empathic senses flaring to life, mapping the entire fortress. She felt the sleeping servants, the bored guards on the night watch, and the sharp, wakeful anxiety of Commander Reese in the war room. She found him hunched over a map, a worried frown on his face. "My lady? What is it?" "They have the king," she said, her voice unervingly calm. "A day's hard ride from here in the Blackwood. Silas is there. He has a psychic with him. They're poisoning his mind. He's losing." Reese stared at her, the color draining from his face. "How could you possibly?" "I just know," she cut him off, her eyes glowing with faint silver light. The air in the room began to hum. "We have to go. Now. My lady, it could be a trap for you. I cannot risk you." His orders were absolute. "His orders are void," she declared, and for the first time she let her full power radiate from her, not as a blast, but as an aura of undeniable authority. It was the power of the last Rosalind, the power of the king's chosen. The torches in the room flickered and flared. "You feel that, Commander? That is what Silas fears. That is what is going to save your king. You can either help me or you can get out of my way. But I am leaving this fortress tonight." Reese looked from her determined face to the flickering torches, feeling the weight of her will pressing against his own. He saw not a fragile Omega but a queen. He slammed his fist on the table. "To the gates. Ready the fastest horses and the elite guard. We ride for the Blackwood." As the fortress erupted into controlled chaos behind her, Agnes walked out into the main courtyard. The night air was cold, but she didn't feel it. She closed her eyes, finding that frayed, pain-filled thread connecting her to Theron. The leech's despair was a black cloud, smothering him. She took a deep breath, and for the first time she did not build a wall. She became a spear. She gathered every ounce of her love, her fury, her reclaimed strength, and the enduring spirit of House Rosalind. She focused it into a single brilliant point of pure incandescent light and sent it screaming down the bond, not to soothe but to shatter. In the dark of the Blackwood, as the wolf's bane burned through his veins and the leech's whispers promised him defeat, a nova of power exploded in Theron's mind. It was Agnes. It was her voice, clear and fierce, a rallying cry for his soul. Get up. The despair shattered. The mental poison evaporated. Theron's eyes, glazed with pain, snapped open, burning with feral silver fire. He threw back his head and let out a roar that shook the very trees, a roar that was answered not by his captors, but by the thunder of approaching hooves on the horizon. Agnes was coming, and she was bringing a storm. Agnes rode at the head of the royal guard like a vengeful spirit, the wind whipping her fiery hair like a banner. She was no longer a passenger in her own life, she was the catalyst. The bond with Theron was a live wire, and through it she guided them, a psychic compass pointing true north to his pain. In the clearing, the scene was a nightmare painting. Theron was on one knee, his powerful body trembling from the wolfsbane, his black fur matted with blood. Silas, in his grey wolf form, stood over him, ready to deliver the final blow. The hooded leech hovered nearby, its void-like presence already gathering for another mental assault. But this time Theron was ready. Agnes's psychic spear had reignited his will. As Silas lunged, Theron met him in a clash of tooth and claw, a desperate, brutal dance. The arrival of the royal guard was a thunderclap. Horses reared, and steel rang out as Rhys and his men engaged Silas's mercenaries. But Agnes had eyes only for the true threat. The leech turned its hooded face toward her, and a wave of pure despair, images of Theron dying, of her family's burning home, of eternal loneliness, slammed into her mind. It was meant to break her. Instead, Agnes smiled. She dismounted, walking calmly into the center of the chaos. "You think you know pain?" she said, her voice carrying over the din of battle. "You are a parasite. You feed on it. I have lived it. I have forged my soul in its fire." She didn't throw up a wall. She opened herself completely. She let the leech feel it all. The searing memory of her family's murder, the years of abuse under Silas, the devastating betrayal of discovering Theron's unwitting role in it. But she didn't send it as a victim. She sent it as a weapon, refined and sharpened by her love for the king who had fought to atone for it. The leech screamed, a thin, reedy sound. It was not equipped to process such vast, raw emotion. It was a siphon trying to drink from a hurricane. It staggered back, its own power turning inward and consuming it, until it collapsed into a silent, unmoving heap. The void was gone. With the psychic assault ended, Theron found his strength. With a final, earth-shaking roar, he overpowered Silas, his jaws closing around the grey wolf's throat. There was a sickening crack, and the life fled from Silas's eyes. The tyrant was dead. The battle ended as quickly as it began. The mercenaries, seeing their master and their secret weapon fallen, threw down their arms. Theron shifted back, stumbling, his leg bleeding profusely. His eyes, burning with a mixture of pain and awe, found Agnes. She ran to him, catching him as he swayed, her small frame straining to support his weight. "You came," he rasped, his hand lifting to cup her face, his touch trembling. "You told me to master the storm," she whispered, her empathy washing over him, soothing his pain, knitting his fractured spirit with her own. "I am." He looked at her, at the woman who had faced down her abuser, shattered a psychic leech and led a charge to save her king. He was not just powerful. She was magnificent. There, surrounded by the evidence of their victory, King Theron did what his heart had commanded from the moment she had hidden behind his throne. He sank to one knee, ignoring the agony in his leg, and took her hand. "Agnes of House Rosalind." His voice was strong, clear, and meant for all to hear. "You have saved my life. You have saved my kingdom from a viper's nest. But more than that, you have saved me. My heart was a fortress of ice, and you have melted it with your courage and your grace. I do not want a queen born of political strategy. I want a queen forged in fire and tempered with compassion. I want you. He looked up, his silver eyes blazing with love and certainty. Rule with me. Not as my omega but as my equal. As my empress. Tears of joy streamed down Agnes's face, reflecting the starlight above. There were no more ghosts, no more shadows. There was only this man, this future, this love. Yes, she breathed the word of vow. Always yes. He stood, sweeping her into his arms and into a kiss that was a promise of 1,000 tomorrows. Around them the entire guard, led by a beaming Commander Reese, knelt in unison, their allegiance shifting in that moment from one monarch to two. The coronation was not held in the dark, intimidating throne room, but in the sun-drenched royal gardens, where their bond had truly begun to heal. Agnes, dressed in a gown of white and gold, her Rosalind crest entwined with the royal sigil, stood beside Theron, her hand firmly in his. As the crown, a delicate, stunning piece of intertwined silver and diamonds that resembled starlight, was placed upon her head, she didn't feel its weight. She felt its rightness. She looked out at the gathered packs, at the council members who now watched her with respect instead of greed. She was no longer the hidden girl, the dangerous weapon, the broken victim. She was Empress Agnes, the empath queen, the woman who had turned her curse into her kingdom's greatest strength, and in doing so had found not just a crown, but a love that would echo through the ages. And as Theron's hand tightened around hers, she sent a wave of love so powerful and pure that every wolf in the kingdom for one blissful second felt it in their soul, a promise of a new golden era. We hope you loved Agnes and Theron's journey from fear to forever. If you believed in their love story, please subscribe and like this video. Your support helps us bring more captivating tales to life. Thank you for watching.